So in this YouTube, I'm going to go through some of the points that I raised in my podcast, Exploring Schumann's Fantasiestücke. If you haven't already checked out the podcast, you can find it on most platforms, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. There'll be details below in the comment section, so do go over there and have a listen. So first things first, one of the things that I mentioned in the podcast, for my mind, one of the interesting features of this first movement is the importance of the semitone in terms of working out how the expression takes its, where the expression comes from. So this is a piece of Romantic period music, and it's very emotion-filled, and this really comes from the way that Schumann selects his notes and how he strings the phrases together. Right from the very, very beginning, we have this E and F in the piano part, here and here. So this sets off, this is the first sort of melodic material that we hear, initiated by the piano, and then this is then echoed and expanded upon in the clarinet. So here we've got an E flat to a D, which is a concert C and B natural in the clarinet part. And then we have an A flat to a G, an E flat to a D, and a C to a B natural. So these are all semitones. So this first phrase, you can see, as it runs between the piano and the clarinet, almost all of the intervals are semitones, and they have this quality of either being used as an accented passing note, or an appoggiatura, or a suspension. So the difference between those, if you're not sure, an appoggiatura is a dissonance which resolves, but it's not preceded by an approach chord that is shared by the dissonant note. And a suspension is basically two chords where one note is left hanging over from the previous chord whilst the rest of the chord is played, and then it resolves, so it's sort of in three parts. So in this first movement, Schumann uses this semitonal falling figure, or not always a falling figure, but often a falling figure. So in the clarinet line you can see here that this figure, it's always falling. And it keeps going all the way through, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but you can see if you then look through, we have the same thing here, B natural to C and A flat to G. Have the E and the F in the piano again, which initiates the same figure. Then we have, the third phrase is a little bit more optimistic, it's more kind of major feeling. It's still got semitones within it, obviously. The semitone is not a new thing, it is obviously part of a scale, but the positions of these notes is less emotional, if you like. And then we have, again down here, F and E, top D flat and C. And then you can see it really expanded upon here in the clarinet part, and this is initiated again by the piano. This is something that's common to this piece, and also the Brahms pieces that I've also podcasted about, is that there's this imitation that happens, and Schumann here starts the piano, and then the clarinet imitates but then expands on. So all of this figuration here, it's all to do with semitones all the time. So that's one of the most important features of this first movement, particularly if you're a clarinetist and you're trying to work out how to work out the expression and the shape of the phrases. Often you've got your hairpins, so like here you've got your hairpin dynamics, which are helping to show the phrases that Schumann is looking for. But these semitones are going to be your friend as you really enjoy the dissonance and leaning into the semitone interval, and that will help you to kind of phrase correctly with the right shapes. The other thing that we have, which we just need to kind of highlight, is these little marks here. If you look in bar 2 and later on. So I'm just doing this in green so you can see. We have this marking here, which is a marking that Schumann uses a lot, but is not necessarily something that is uniform, and it's not that we commonly see. We used to sing accents, of course, but this indication is something Schumann uses to distinguish between, to highlight notes that he wants to be expressed particularly. So it's kind of like, it's a bit like how other composers would use a tenuto mark. So if I were to put a tenuto mark like that over the top on those particular notes, for a bit of emphasis. So tenuto obviously means held, and it can mean that we play the note for full value, but it can also connote playing something with a little bit more emphasis, but not as much as an accent. So here you can see if you strictly play what you're seeing, you've got a little bit of a push up and then a receding on just on one note. So ti dom da dee 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 da. You make the A flat here in the clarinet part come through. So those are things just to notice on this first page. Other things when you're listening, and as a clarinetist, of course, one of the things that I'm always encouraging players to do is ensure that they listen to people performing this whilst looking at the piano score like this, because you really need to know what's going on in music like this in the piano part just as much, if not every bit more than your own part. Because when you've got a single line, you've only got part of the story, and underneath you, as you can see here, the clarinet part is fairly simple, and it's quite deceptive. But underneath you, all the time, you've got this triplet motor that's kind of flowing underneath you. So the piano part has this underlay of emotion, if you like. It's kind of driving the feeling underneath you. So all of these triplets, and frequently, if we look here, this kind of section, you see that obviously we've got 3 against 2, so we've got triplets in the piano part, and normal quavers, or duplets, if you like, in the clarinet part. So there's always tension when we have those things against each other, because they don't quite fit together. So they create a disturbance in the music. And then this is features all the way through, that there's always this triplet and duplet tension. This is what makes the piece also have its particular character. There's a sort of a restless nature to the character, and that's derived partly from these semitones, but also partly from this interplay between the triplets and the duplets. And the whole time, you see, even if on this bottom line here, where we've got this halting, almost sobbing feel in the clarinet, ti-dom, ti-dom, we've got triplets underneath all of that the whole time. So it doesn't quite fit. And there's a melodic line that you can see in the piano part here. So I'm going to use the green again. So all the time that the clarinet is playing these duplet ta-dee, ta-dom, the piano is playing this. It's got this sort of top line that's coming through. Dun da dun da dun da dun da dun. So those things are they run counter to each other. They don't fit neatly together. So this creates a lot of this sense of tension and instability, or something that is unsettled, and that will explain when you're listening to this why it has a certain kind of quality to it. It doesn't sound like it's sort of flowing in an easy way. It's not like listening to the Trout or something like that. It has a much more of a sense of unsettled is the best way of describing it, I think. So some other things just to notice. The reason I was saying looking at the piano part, we have here in bar 1, we have this forte piano here, and this happens several times. So you can see I'm just highlighting the places where you can see it in the piano part. And this isn't something that's picked up in the clarinet part in this first movement. So when you hear this, it's not really as strong as perhaps a lot of people come to play forte piano. They often see it, and in the 20th century, it's much more of a hard-edged quality. In the Romantic period, it needs to be more expressive, but it still has this sort of sort of sense of reinforcing or bringing a line to the fore. So you can see on that first bar, ti-dom, and it's again in the second line. It's emphasising in a similar way to this little mark that I emphasise in green in bar 2 in the clarinet. But it's a little bit stronger than that. If the clarinet one is quite a sort of gentle emphasis, the forte piano is implying something a little bit stronger, but it's not, again, it's not too harsh. But you need to listen out for those because they come at interesting points in the piece and later on in the other movements, and they're developed. So here on the second page, we're building up, we've had this ti-dom, ti-dom, this halting figure that we have here. And then what we're looking for, one of the tricky things, this is for the clarinetists, is this first interval, E flat to E flat. Now, this note here needs to be played with the fourth finger of the right hand. That's not right, I'll do that again. So, bear with me for a moment. So, we need to make sure, because usually we play this with kind of a forked fingering. Some people even play it with the middle finger, and this never makes a good sound. So playing a top E flat with a middle finger, I think is a bad idea. But here we actually need to play with a fourth finger. So there's the joints. So you obviously need your E flat key down, but you're using the fourth finger here. Now that's basically derived from this E flat fingering, and all you're doing is that you're just, instead of playing with the forked fingering, so the forked fingering would look like this. I was drawing the fingering, so you've got your first finger down, and then this little key that in between your third finger and your fourth finger, and obviously your E flat key. That's how you'd normally play a top E flat. But on this one, because you're slurring from an E flat an octave lower, you can't get your fingers to the fork key. So you need to find another fingering. So the best one is this one. Instead, in the right hand, you're using your fourth finger and the E flat key. That's the best way you're going to do that smoothly and successfully, and also beautifully, because this is the top of the phrase, and is the most expressive point so far in the piece. So it's important to get that right. So those fingerings are there if you want to kind of check them out. And then we having had this climax, we move back down. And then we move into the F major section of the piece, the B section if you like, oops, which is here. So this is the B section. We've just had the A section, which is, of course is an A minor. And here we have this absolutely exquisite B section. And this is interesting because everything opens up. So these triplets that have been noodling away and creating sort of dark ripples underneath the first section are now in a much more open configuration. So here we've just got these opened up arpeggios. So this gives it a breezy, a lighter kind of feel. But then there's something quite magical that happens, and it's been the cause of lots of debate, and I talked about this in the podcast. It's to do with these bars here. So in these bars, you've got this interesting question about the notes that we are playing here in the piano part and what's going on around it. So here we have an E natural in the bass, and we have an E natural, because this is an untransposed clarinet part, so a G is an E. And right next to it, literally in the same sort of space, is that we have an E flat in the piano part. And what's been going on elsewhere is we have lots of diminished sevenths. So we have this idea, this arpeggiated figure here that the clarinet is doing is a diminished seventh. And lots of people will say, well, if there's an E natural in the clarinet part, and there's been an E natural in the bass because it's similarly doing the same kind of diminished seventh here, why is there an E flat in the clarinet, in the piano part, right hand? and it creates this delicious dissonance. So it's a diminished octave. So we have an E natural below in the clarinet part, and we have an E flat above that, so not quite making an octave, or a major seventh if you want to call it that. Sonically, that's what it will come across. It's a delicious moment, and it's intentional. If you look back at all the manuscripts, Schumann very clearly states that he wants the E flat. There's been some conjecture about whether it was a mistake, but he was, in all of the successive editions that came after the original manuscript, it's always been put as an E flat. And the fact that there is an E natural in the piano part here tells us that it's intentional, because there's no reason to put that E natural there. If you look at the previous bar, we've got F major, so there's absolutely no reason, and there hasn't been an E flat or anything affecting the E for a long time. You can look back and there's not a single thing. I'm struggling to find anything in the music that's just gone before. So that E natural in the left hand and then followed by an E flat in the piano part is correct. So if anybody's asking whether that's the right thing, yes it is, and it's a delicious moment. You want to really enjoy it. It's a little spine-tingling moment. So that's what's going on there, and this is tricky. You've got these flowing quavers. We always need to make sure as clarinetists that we know where to breathe, and I'll work out where that's going to happen. I would suggest here is a good place to breathe, sort of before the crescendo, up to the top. It's difficult to do it in any other way. You certainly don't really want to breathe here. I would put an arrow. It's not very clear, I hope you can bear with me. But, so ta ya da dee 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 da dee, ba da dee dee dee, ya dee dee da, going up. And then probably at the top, if you need to. Ideally, you want to go all the way through. That's what I would do, and I would breathe here just before you get to the last little jump up to the top. Those are the most important things, I think, for interpretation for clarinetists and pianists, I guess. When we have the recapitulation here, notice that it's pianissimo now, and that we had it piano at the beginning. In the podcast, I mentioned the fact that, again, like Brahms, and in this period, we don't have dynamics in between. We don't have mezzo pianos, we don't have mezzo fortes, or they rarely appear, and they certainly don't appear in any of the Fantasiestücke. So, but that doesn't mean that we don't have dynamics in between piano and forte. It just means that we have to think about dynamics in a different way, and we need to think about character and mood, about what is going on and how the moods shift. And these pieces being called Fantasiestücke, fantasy pieces, it's all about the imagination, but the fantasy, the specific fantasy, isn't detailed. It's not given a name, it's not part of a title. And in this period, when we were in the Romantic period, it was all about exploring the mystical, the magical, the realm of the imagination, of fantasy, of dreams, nightmares. But there's not a specific fantasy in mind. Sometimes composers will be more specific. They might be talking about a story, a fairy story, or something like that. But in this particular case, Schumann doesn't give us a specific thing to focus on. It's for us to use our imagination. These pieces were originally titled by him Soireestücke, which means evening pieces. And whilst he didn't settle on that for a title and changed it quite quickly to Fantasiestücke, the idea of evening is something to definitely keep in mind when you're trying to work out the moods that you think are applicable to this piece. So we have our recapitulation, which is pianissimo. So we need to save something a little bit more intimate, a little bit more special for that return. But the music is the same, harmonies are the same. And the only thing that's different is that we have a coda. So the way that the piece is finished, we have this music that starts here. We have this quite emphatic chord. It's a sforzando, not a forte piano. So this really is a sort of a reinforcement. It's an emotional moment. It's a pivotal statement. So we've had this, again, the big climax here, and the beginning of this coda is sort of the final statement, the final kind of word on this particular story that we've just been narrating. So we have this shift here as the piece ends with A major. So we started in A minor, and we briefly looked at C major and then F major. And now here we are with an A major, which is an old-fashioned sort of tierce to Picardy, where what was a minor tonality is switched right at the very end to the major tonality with the same root note. So we were A minor and now we're A major. And the clarinet finally states that it's been a bit ambiguous, even though there were lots of C sharps, as you can see in the piano part. We don't have the C sharp until this E natural, which is a concert C sharp. And they have these two quick, brisk spread chords and the word attacca, which means get moving, got to turn the page over because we need to move to the second movement, and I'll do a separate video for that.